you so much for doing this today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Our podcast is about usually the artist's journey in music and how they got to where they are today. I know your dad, obviously, huge musician, massive singer-songwriter, and you have this amazing documentary coming out. So we'll talk all about that and maybe about growing up, with Harry as their father. I don't know if that's stuff you'd be willing to chat about as well.
I'll chat about just about anything.
All right, cool. Awesome, Jason. Thank you again so much for doing this. Yeah, so tell me about growing up. Where'd you grow up?
Well, born in Brooklyn, so that's where we were before we moved out to Long Island. We were on the South Shore in a tiny little town called Point Lookout, which is right on the beach. A lot of great memories there. And then we moved to the North Shore of Long Island, a town called Huntington. And that's where we lived for a couple decades until my mother sold the house about a dozen years ago.
Wow. Okay. And growing up in like a musical household, were you and your, I know you have like 4 other siblings, correct? You're one of 5. Okay. And are all of you musical? Like, were you all interested in music?
We all took music in middle school and a little bit of high school, but my younger sister, Jen, is the only professional musician in the family.
Okay.
She writes and she sings and she performs.
That's amazing. Very cool. So tell me about growing, like, must have been such a different, lifestyle having your dad as this, major icon. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, was it like as a young kid, did you understand the fame he had?
Well, I mean, going back to when I was really young, before he got the record contract, before he had a hit, he was the normal dad. We did sports, we did the family trips and, a lot of other normal stuff. But then, once he got the record contract, things just got very interesting.
Sure. Okay.
And, I remember being a little kid and being woken up to see him on Johnny Carson. And that was a trip. And also just many times we would go to his concerts or we'd go on tour with him for a couple days. And, just seeing him perform in front of thousands of people, seeing him, put out albums, seeing him do big interviews, seeing him, have these great projects lined up because, he had the opportunity to do a lot of different things. It got really exciting. And I tell you, it was great to watch him because he really embraced, he dove into stuff. There was no hesitation when he committed to something. And so he took on some crazy things, but I think he really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I was under the impression that maybe he already had to achieve some success prior to, having his family. I know I've seen interviews where he talks about, what are you going to do now? Yeah, I'm going to go home to my 5 kids. I want to know, like, so you watched his whole career build. That's amazing. So tell me about, like, before getting signed to the record deal, like, was he going out and just playing like coffee shops? Like, how did that whole thing get going?
He grew up in a large family. His father was a well-known drummer, played in a lot of bands, and so he was exposed to that. He had an uncle, Michael Burke, who picked up the guitar. He was exposed to that. But as a kid, he had a grandmother who was really pushing music and paid for his trumpet lessons.
Okay.
And his brothers also took up a couple different musical instruments, but then they also were part of the Grace Church choir in Brooklyn. And so, there were little exposures to music, but then when they became teenagers and, they all started to play guitar, they started to play together and they played for just, a local family was having a party, so they would play. And then when they got up to got the courage up, they would go into New York City and play in all the different clubs in the Greenwich Village. So they would play as the Chapin brothers, and they even got a record deal. And, the record didn't go anywhere. There were no hits. Okay. It was just their first album, but it was a great experience for them. Sure. And then, it was a couple of years later when they took a big chance. And this is funny. This is when my father was doing documentary film. So he was really a filmmaker before he was a successful musician. And
that's interesting.
And he was kind of thinking that he would go into music for a while to make some money so he could go back and make some more documentary films. He didn't think that he had a long career ahead of him in music. He just thought it would be the next chapter. Mm-hmm. So his brothers and my father, they rented out this place in the village for the summer. They were going to pay $400 a week to rent the place out, and then whatever ticket sales they sold would be money that they could make. And my father opened up for his brothers Tom and Steve, and my father bombed as a solo act. You
Oh,
know, after a
wow.
couple nights, it was dead. It was just nothing was happening. And so he said, you know what, this needs some work. So he quickly, in a matter of 2 weeks, he put together his band, which included John Wallace, who was from the same church choir.
Wow.
And then he put an ad in the Village Voice for a cellist, and they interviewed a bunch of cellists, and they ended up with Tim Scott. And then they found a bass player, a lead guitarist from upstate New York, Ron Palmer. So it was just the four of them, and then playing the same songs, but now playing with a band and feeling much more confident about their sound. They got a great response. They got such a great response. They were doing better than his brothers, who were the main act.
Oh, wow.
And then they started getting some attention from the different record companies, and it ended up that my father was getting a lot of interest from Elektra Records, which was founded by Jack Holtzman, and also from Clyde Davis, who was at Columbia. And so he ended up in a bidding war.
Wow.
Here's a guy who starts the summer trying to, put a band together. And then by the end of the summer, he's in a bidding war.
Bidding war.
And so it went back and forth, back and forth. He ended up with Jack Holtzman, who agreed to produce the first album and sign him to a 10-record deal.
Wow. And how old were you and your brothers and sisters at this point?
Oh, at the time, I have 2 older siblings and 2 younger siblings. The younger siblings were in diapers, and I was about, probably about 4 or 5 going to these concerts at these clubs in the village that were opening up at 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
Oh my gosh.
Not exactly a typical family experience.
Right. Well, so you remember going to those shows? What were you?
Yeah.
What were you doing? Just hanging out backstage as a
I didn't
4-year-old?
know what I was doing. I was just
Right.
hanging out with my siblings, and we were
That's
just
cool.
watching someone sing songs for about an hour or so, and then we would jump in the car and head home.
Wow. So at 4, you were really exposed to this, but you actually saw, what was the so at what, 5, 6 is when he signs the deal and stuff starts to really change?
Yeah, it was 71 when he started playing and got the record contract, and his first album came out in 72. So I was about 8, and it was just warp speed from then on.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Because I would imagine that you guys would probably, I don't know, move to a bigger house. Was that all stuff that kind of happened quickly, and was that strange?
It's a story that he told that I think is really interesting. This is right around the same time when he's starting to perform with his own band. His brother Tom was the host of a children's TV show on ABC called Make-A-Wish.
Okay.
And so Tom was the host, and he would perform 2 songs. And my father wrote about 140 songs for that show that was on air for about 4 years.
Wow.
So he was making money off of some songs he was writing for a TV show. So when he talks about the big house we had in Huntington, he calls it the Make-A-Wish house. Now, it's a little combination of, money he made from the TV show and money that he made from the record contract. But then he was also touring a lot, so he was making a lot of money from concerts.
Yeah. And was that different? Because was he touring when you were, really young prior to signing?
No,
so that must have been changed for you and your family.
Yeah, well, when you get a record deal, the record company wants you to get out on the road and promote the album.
Right.
So you're basically just doing whatever they tell you, wherever they send you, wherever you can play. So he was on the road a lot, with his band, and we didn't see him for weeks at a time. And then he'd come home for a few days, go back out on the road. So it was a lot of busyness, but it was, more him being away than being around. And then, things kind of settled down once he got into the routine where he would be touring, and then he'd be home for a while, and then he'd be doing an album. But a lot of coming and going. He did over 200 concerts a year, so he was on the road a lot.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Do you remember, at what age did you really kind of start understanding, how big of a deal he was, and how impactful he was to everybody?
When you hear your father on the radio, that's a big deal.
Sure.
And then when you hear that he's got, a hit on the radio, that's a big deal. And then when you see him performing in front of a lot of people, that's also pretty exciting. But I'd say, also when your friends start talking about it, then it's like, wow, that's also pretty pretty incredible because, you know, you think of him as your father, but then when your friends are looking up to him, that's kind of pretty cool too.
Yeah, that's very cool. Do you like, when did you start? Like, do you remember the first time people started like kind of coming up to you and being like, oh, like, you know, want to talk to your dad and kind of bother him?
My first memory, and I was probably only about 6 at the time, and we were living in this tiny little house in Point Lookout, and there wasn't a lot going on. I think there was just around when he got the record contract and Taxi was getting airplay. Someone in school asked me if I could get my dad's autograph.
Oh, wow. That's really
And
cool.
I didn't know what an autograph was. So I have to go to
Right.
my dad and say, somebody wants your autograph. What is that? And then he signed a piece of paper and gave it to me, and I brought it back to school.
Oh my God. I wonder if it was for him or his like dad found out or something. He's like, hey, because
I don't know.
I would have done that if I knew my son's friend was his dad was Harry Chapin. I'd be like, hey, yeah, can you get an autograph for me? That's funny. So you have this documentary.
Yeah.
You said your father was a documentary filmmaker, or he aspired to be. Was that kind of what started? Like, what was the reason that you decided
Well,
to do this
there's
documentary?
there's just, I don't know, it seems like a lot of things lined up. So he was making documentaries. He made one called Legendary Champions, which was about the history of boxing going
Wow.
back to the 1800s, and it actually got an Academy Award nomination.
Jeez.
So you know, then you know, fast forward to my senior year in high school, and my father had recently passed away, and one of my classmates, a very good friend of mine, David Miller, he wanted to do a documentary about my father. So, you know, he put that together on his own. It was a big, you know, senior project, and, you know, it wasn't something that was going to be released in theaters, but it was the first documentary. Then fast forward another 20 years or so, VH1 had its Behind the Music series, and they
Sure.
did a piece on my father. And, you know, then, you know, around then, you know, it was a little bit before that, there was the Carnegie Hall tribute where my father was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. So
Hmm.
there were these big events, and you think, you know, okay, you know, he's got loyal fans. That's great. And every now and then we were able to put out some new albums with some unreleased material. And then there were some um, different other compilations put together, but we didn't really know that there was going to be interest in doing anything else. And periodically there'd be, you know, a request to use Cats in the Cradle for a TV commercial or in a TV show or in a movie. But there was a guy named Rick Korn, who's the director and one of the producers on the film, who was involved in an organization my father started in 1975 with Bill Ayers. It was called World Hunger Year. Now it's called WhyHunger. And it was all about the beginning of my father's effort to dedicate the rest of his life to fighting hunger and poverty. And so over the years, Rick and Bill Ayers worked together on a couple projects, and they had a conversation about 2.5 years ago. And Rick, you know, was, you know, fascinated with my father's life and said to Bill Ayers, you know, how come nobody's ever done a documentary about Harry Chapin? And Bill looks at Rick and says, I don't know, but you should do it. And Rick said, you know what, I'm up for the challenge. So he put together a treatment. He contacted my mother and I. We had a meeting, and it just seemed really exciting because he wasn't just going to focus on his life and music. He wanted to focus on the humanitarian side,
Hmm.
focus on his fight to end hunger and poverty. So, you know, it just seemed like it was the right time because, you know, there was a lot going on in our country with a lot of social issues, and there was a growing problem with hunger and poverty. And, you know, there was also an interest in, you know, putting something together that we thought his fans would love. So over about 2 years, we put together the film, and we're very fortunate that there were so many people who were close to my father back in the 70s who agreed to be in the film.
Hmm.
So, you know, when Billy Joel agreed, that was huge. That was just so exciting to have him part of it. And Pat Benatar, who had, you know, knew him way back when they met in a little bar in Huntington when she was performing. My father, you know, thought she was very talented and invite her to be in a musical he was working on. And then, you know, all the other greats that stepped in, you know, Sir Bob Geldof and my father's old manager, Ken Kragen, just, it became richer and richer because there were just so many different facets of his life, and former band members and his brothers also were instrumental in it, and other family members. So it just was a full story waiting to be told.
Hmm.
And once it was all put together, it seemed like it was the right time and the right place to release it. And, having a great partner for a distributor, first getting it out in theaters, which is really great, although quite challenging during a pandemic.
Right.
And then also, having partnerships with all the streaming companies, everyone from Amazon to Apple iTunes to
Mhm.
Fandango. And so now getting it out there and the cable companies picking it up, that's huge. And then the DVD comes out on November 10th.
Very good. So can you stream it now or
Yeah. If you
okay,
go
so
to
it is
Harry
available now. Just
Chapin,
November 10th is the physical copy comes out.
yeah. So if you go to harrychapinmovie.com,
Hmm.
you will see all of the theaters and the virtual cinemas that are offering it, and then all the streaming. And then you can go to your local cable company and see if they're also providing it as a video on demand.
That's amazing. And I did see, yeah, like you said, Billy Joel's in it, Pat Benatar. You have excerpts of Bruce Springsteen talking about your father. It's the trailer is amazing. I cannot wait to watch the film.
Yeah.
But
And
tell me about, did you ever, I mean, you must have been around when people like Bruce Springsteen were just hanging out. Is that something that
they
you
weren't
remember?
hanging out at my house, and Springsteen tells some great stories about how they were recording at the same time in a studio in LA. And my father, I can make fun of him. He was, the kind of person who just loved to talk. And so he would talk. And some people, could handle it for about 20 minutes or a half hour, but then he kept going.
Okay.
And so, Springsteen talks about how my father was just, always, ready to talk about every topic under the sun. And so, I think their relationship was based on some of their interactions in the recording studio, and maybe they bumped into each other sometimes on the road. But some of the other musicians like Kenny Rogers, who, they shared the same manager. And Kenny Rogers, before he made it really big, he did a benefit concert at our local high school with my father to raise money for, another one of my father's causes. And
Wow.
couldn't have been nicer. But the great thing about people like Kenny Rogers, after my father passed away, he stepped in and stepped up, and he was doing fundraisers and raising money for WhyHunger, as well as the Harry Chapin Foundation.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. So he was able to kind of, step in there and make sure that everything was still moving on that front.
Yeah, keep the
Wow.
spirit alive, keep the legacy going.
I mean,
Really,
that must have been tragic though. You must have been fairly young when he passed away. You said you were a senior in high school when, when
17, so I was going into my senior year. Yeah.
oh my, I mean, at 38, to look at all that he accomplished, it's just mind blowing. I mean, and what a awful, tragedy to lose somebody like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I can just come up with my own theories, but I don't know if he thought that he was going to live a long life. He was, as a kid, he had severe asthma. He spent a lot of time in the emergency room, and that was his big health problem. But also, he just felt like he was living fast because he didn't know how long he was going to live. And so he wrote a song about that called There Only Was One Choice, about how he thought he was going to die in his early 30s. And then toward the end of his life, I think he realized that at 38, maybe he wasn't going to die that young. Maybe he's going to lead a full life. But he also knew that you can't take anything for granted. You got to live your life to the fullest. And this was, he had about a 10-year music career, and he had already put in, about 1,000 benefit concerts and 5 years committed to ending hunger and poverty. And so I think he was starting to think about, how he was going to be spending the rest of his life. And, it was a tragic loss, and, it was a tremendous shock to all of us. And just feel like, we just felt like there was just so much life left in him. But at the same time, knowing that he's been gone almost 40 years, and a lot of things that he started that was really passionate about continue on. And that's only because of his tremendous fans, a lot of friends, family members, and just a lot of people feeling connected to some of the things that were important to him.
Do you feel like when you, like you said, you're in senior year, you and a friend made the documentary on your father. Do you feel like that was kind of a way to, cope with what was happening at the time?
Well, I wasn't involved in the high school documentary that my friend made, but it's just, it seems like it's a full circle. The fact that he was making documentaries, and now here we are making a documentary about him. And I learned a lot about him making this documentary because Rick and his partner S.A. Barron, the other producer, who did a beautiful job editing the film, they went into the archives, into basically a closet in the Chapin office in Huntington, and found a bunch of stuff that hadn't been digitized, hadn't been converted, so nobody knew what was there. So they were able to transfer it to digital format. And then it was the first time I was able to see about 3 hours of his memorial service. It was the first time I was able to see some interviews that he had done. First time I was able to see some performances that he had done, and some other stuff that didn't even know existed.
Yeah, that must have been pretty amazing to, like you said, find. What was the most, what do you think was like the most amazing thing that you had found out about your father that you didn't know prior to doing this documentary?
Well, I think that he was a little ahead of his time when he was talking about a lot of social issues back then. So to hear him talk in the interviews about, some things, not just hunger and poverty, but he was really into, racial issues. He was really into women's issues. He was really into, a lot of the issues that we're struggling with today. And he was talking about how this is, a lot of this goes back to the same root causes. It's people who are not able to realize their full potential because for whatever reasons they're held back, they're not given the same opportunities. Hunger and poverty to him was a lot about people just not having access to a good job or not having access to a lot of opportunities other people have. So he was very intellectual in that way and very, I'd say, very focused on some of the larger issues of the day that seem to be important issues today. But I think one of the shockers in the documentary was he did an interview I'd never seen before where he talks about, how tragic it would be if he were to die in a car crash.
Wow.
And, he was basically saying, that would never happen. But of course, that's how he died.
Sure.
And we always thought because he was flying around the country constantly that, it was likely that he'd die in a plane crash.
Plane crash.
He was basically telling us what was going to happen, which is pretty scary.
That is, wow. And oh my gosh, yeah, that's eerie. That kind of gave me like goosebumps to hear. That's crazy. When you were doing the documentary, was it hard to kind of, with all the things that he had accomplished, and even in a short period of time, was it hard to break that all down into, make it like linear and have it all kind of condensed down into, an hour and a half, 2 hours?
I have so much more appreciation for filmmaking and all the work that goes into it, because you have to film basically hundreds of hours and then boil it down into about an hour and a half. So we ended up with 93 minutes, but we had to cut about an hour's worth of stuff that we wish we didn't have to cut.
Sure.
And we also had about 3 different endings that went on for about 20 minutes. But, we also have to recognize that anyone watching a movie, it's got to move and it's got to be, engaging every single scene, every single second. So you just keep cutting and cutting and cutting until it gets tighter and tighter.
Maybe some bonus features, with some of the old footage that you weren't able to make.
I will mention something that was interesting. So, the whole message of the movie is, it's called Harry Chapin, When in Doubt, Do Something. But my father's credo was, when in doubt, do something. And he was all about doing something. So, that inspired Rick and his partner S.A. After they finished editing the film, they wanted to do something, and they were thinking about the upcoming election. They were thinking about all the social issues. So they created a docu-concert called Do Something and Vote.
Oh, wow.
And they got a bunch of musicians, and they're fabulous musicians. They got permission to use something from Bruce Springsteen, Tedeschi and Trucks, a couple other artists who are really fabulous that, because of this film, I think you're going to get a little more exposure. And it also includes some of my father's remarks when he was in Washington, and a song that he did called Cry for My Country, which could be, a hit today because it's just all about all the things going on.
Relevant, right? Yeah.
And so there are some scenes in that documentary that you don't see in the other documentary. And it's also available now on LiveX Live, and it's about an hour long. So I think it's a companion piece. It's complimentary, and it's just another way of showing, the the power of music, and when people in music get behind a cause, it just seems to attract a lot of other people, and great things start to happen.
Yeah. I can't wait to see it. Like I said, I saw the trailer. It looks really, really amazing. And like some of the footage that you guys have found in the archive, it looks like it'd be it's going to be great. I can't wait to check it out. So thank you, Jason, so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I actually have one more question for you. I'm curious, growing up, in that household and being around all these people in the music industry, do you have any advice? Like, if you could give a piece of advice to an aspiring artist, or somebody trying to do this, what would that be?
Well, quickly, there are a couple things, and I think we all heard this before. Find something you love. My sister has a line in one of her songs called "Find your joy and let it show." You can't pursue something, if you're not into it, if it's not something that you really love and you're really driven to do. So, if it's writing, or if it's writing and performing, but also know that it takes a lot of time and effort, takes a lot of failure to perfect your craft. My father wrote over 400 songs, and I don't think most people know more than a handful of them. So it just goes to show that there are a lot of work that you do that no one even knows about. But it is also, I think, very important to just put yourself out there, take chances, show some courage. And so if you have some new material, just share it with an audience, and wait for a reaction. And a lot of times people are going to love the fact that it's new. A lot of times people are going to love the fact that you created something. A lot of times people are going to want to support you. So, my thing, which I think is my father's thing, is go for it. Just talk to as many people as possible, meet as many people as possible, take advantage of every opportunity you get to perform. Just give it your all. Don't leave anything on the table. Bringing it backwards.